Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I am pleased to welcome founder of the media hub called The New Populist, Lily Forand. Lily, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I first found The New Populist when a video of yours came across my TikTok, and I was instantly just intrigued with what you were doing. So I wanted to reach out. And I guess just to get going here, I want to know kind of what's your origin story of The New Populist? Like, why did you start this?
Yeah, so I've been interested in political polarization for a long time. And like when I was in high school, I founded like the political union. I don't think anyone showed up to the meetings, but was always very interested in seeing young people, um, our generation kind of see through and beyond uh, the kind of culture war issues and other things that have kind of taken up our attention, I think, for too long, and focus more on our core kind of needs and core economic needs. So in college, I got a grant to go to San Francisco and Alabama for a summer and interview people about their politics. Incredible experience. Got to meet a lot of interesting people. Some of my assumptions were challenged, some were reaffirmed. Um, I met a drag queen in Alabama who I think was a veteran. And they said to me, it's a great quote. They were like, they don't hate you. They're like, they don't hate you because you're gay. They hate you because, talking about Republicans, they don't hate you because you're gay. They hate you because if you're gay, they assume you're a Democrat and they hate Democrats, which I thought was just such a perfect description of kind of our current political situation. Um, so yeah, I went to UConn, tried to figure out what I wanted to do post college. Journalism is not the most kind of lucrative or growing field right now, and so I decided I wanted to kind of try my own thing and was honestly kind of a mix of political circumstances were or prompted me to get involved in this. One being honestly like the public reception to the shooting of the United Health CEO.
Okay.
It was very interesting seeing in my comment section things that I had, felt for a long time and wanted to see resonate with more people. I'm seeing comments saying like, not on my page, just on other people's pages, like it's not right versus left, it's up versus down. And so I felt like I had knowledge and experience to kind of come in that moment and like help provide framing and information for people who were interested in that kind of way of looking at politics, I guess. And
Okay.
just post Trump and like kind of the chaos, wanted to kind of continue to help Gen Z see their core needs met, their core economic needs. So that's kind of where the new populist came from.
So it
Wanted
was mainly
to,
directed at young people.
yes, and part of it is just because like that's who uses social media, though everyone uses social media now. But my audience is mostly people under 34. I don't get stats from TikTok and Instagram on under 18, but I assume that that's also a block of my audience.
Gotcha. Okay, and so, I kind of want to ask a little bit about that. So you create a lot of videos on, your TikTok, Instagram, you have a YouTube channel, and you do some interviews for podcasts, and you create a lot of great clips on TikTok. What's kind of like the idea behind the content you're creating? What message are you trying to get out there?
So a number of things. The main one being helping young people see past kind of politicized demographic divides, whether that's men and women, race, religion, political affiliation, and see or kind of come together under the umbrella of economic populism. And if you look at, there's a poll that the Harvard Institute of Politics does twice a year, where they kind of assess young people's kind of political, personal needs and kind of take the temperature of young people. And most um, of the survey data shows that young people have the same priorities, the same political priorities, the same
Sure.
economic priorities, and have a lot more in common on paper than they seem to online or anywhere else. And so, what I'm trying to do is reinforce that message and hopefully also kind of direct people towards possible solutions for their economic angst. I talk with people on both sides of the aisle. Would like to talk with more conservatives. Haven't been able to get as many as I'd like. But for example, I talked with someone from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which is more conservative, and then someone from Democracy at Work, which is much more left.
Hmm.
Talked with both people about the issue of pro-family policy, and the kind of consensus from both, it was remarkably similar. It was, you know, the right needs to be more willing to open up their pocketbooks and fund things like paid family leave, and the left needs to be more willing to recognize the importance of the nuclear family, and the importance of motherhood, and like the whole, like, you know corporate America, go freeze your eggs and like
Sure.
work for 10 years also doesn't really make sense. And so I appreciate kind of trying to find common ground between the two anti-establishment kind of segments of American politics. And I think there's definitely pushback on that, but I think there's definitely more common ground than people realize. Um, and it is yeah.
I definitely agree there. There is way more common ground than people realize. But I think for me, from my perspective, it's how do we achieve these goals? Like how do we get there, right? And you kind of touch on economic populism, and like your media hub's called the New Populist. Would you say that you kind of are more left wing populism, or more on the right, a little bit of both? I mean, I kind of have seen your content, so I kind of have a feel of what I'd say, but I just want you to talk to a little bit the audience, like where you stand, and kind of what the, I guess, values of kind of the media and the New Populist is.
So it's kind of a little bit of both. I personally lean more left. And what I will say is interesting is, in a blind test, most people also support more left economic policies. And so I don't think it's bad to necessarily promote or highlight those, although I think, again, the kind of pro-family stuff on the right, the kind of um, interest in kind of culture and identity, although I maybe have very different kind of ideas of what a solution could be for people. I understand kind of where they're coming from. I think like religion is really important for people. It's a way to get, community and connection and purpose, and like, so I think even if I don't necessarily agree, I think it's an important issue, I guess. And so I also hope, as the New Populist grows, I'm able to bring in more people to work with me who are on the right and left. So it's like there's also the kind of issue of like, what is the New Populist and what is Lily? And the lines sometimes blur a little bit, but the ultimate goal is to get kind of more voices from both the populist right and populist left, and kind of create a populist middle, which I think seems counterintuitive. It's not centrism, it is a new, different thing. It's, yeah.
Well, I like that, and I think that there's a difference, right, between like your personal beliefs and your personal brand can be different to kind of the little media hub that, like you kind of mentioned, you're trying to create. I can relate to that with kind of my newsletter that I write. Like I don't want really my face behind it because I'm just trying to talk about what's going on in
Yep.
the world and in the day. Versus like I have strong opinions and beliefs and what's going on and what makes me angry and whatever, but I try not to show that in my
Yep. Yep.
newsletter. So I can definitely understand where you're coming from there. And I want to ask you a couple other things, but I want to address something you just said. You kind of talk about a populist middle, a populist center.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious to know, what does that look like in your opinion? Because I will say that the populist right and the populist left definitely agree on a lot. And I would say like one thing that just comes to mind would be like just stop funding and fighting all these wars abroad. I think that that's definitely something, because like when I think of populist left, and we can kind of name drop here, I think of like the Young Turks as
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
that comes to mind. Versus like it's kind of hard on the populist right. I don't think that these people would like the label populist, but I think of like Ron Paul libertarians is what comes to mind, and I feel
Mhm.
like they're kind of aligned on something like anti-war. From your stance, your perspective, what are a couple other things that the populist right and the populist left agree on?
I mean, I think within the last year, like Josh Hawley and Bernie co-sponsored a bill to
Sure.
raise the minimum wage. So I think economic issues, there's more of a kind of post-neoliberal consensus growing on both the left and the right that kind of unchecked, unregulated free markets are not correcting themselves necessarily, and there are a lot of Americans who are struggling and need not necessarily a handout, although I don't have problems with kind of public options,
Sure.
um, but need, in my opinion, need checks on these corporations. And so if you're Walmart and your CEO is making, I think it's like 963 times the average worker salary, and your employees are some of the biggest recipients of kind of social kind of Medicare, Medicaid,
Entitlements,
like
programs.
anti-social entitlements. Um, I don't think that we should just let that happen
Hmm.
and not put a kind of again a check on that organization because or on that company because again like in a small town where Walmart moves in, a lot of other companies move out. So it's not as though people
Sure.
can select to work somewhere else or buy somewhere else. I would like the government to get maybe a little bit more involved in regulating companies and regulating monopolies and someone like Lena Khan, who I think people like Josh Hawley and Steve Bannon call themselves conservatives.
Hmm.
Um, for their kind of appreciation for her antitrust policy. And so again, I keep saying so again, but economic populism and figuring out how to support and uplift working families, I think are probably the two big ones. Um, and I
I
also think, yeah,
no, sorry. I would just say like I would agree there, and I definitely, if you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of agree with you on one point and then push back a little bit. So first off, you kind of noted on I can't remember, it was Holly and whoever the other senator
I
was that were
think
pushing
Holly and Bernie.
Bernie that were pushing for the increase into $15 minimum wage. And you kind of touched on, a Walmart example and unchecked free market, where it's like I could, if playing devil's advocate, could make the argument that the markets haven't been unchecked and it's been the government that's been kind of creating this cronyism that's created like a monopoly like Walmart. And then also like for example, like on the right wing populist side, the true free marketers, they're saying like, well, minimum wage, like why do you think it's like a company like Walmart, they are okay with the minimum wage because they can afford it, versus like a minimum wage pushing that up, that limit puts a lot of small people out of business because they can't afford to pay someone $15 an hour, but maybe $10 an hour they could, and in the free market that works itself out. Just curious, what are your thoughts? Just like an argument like that.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree. I think you don't want to see small businesses get left behind. And I think that there are also other political avenues to support small businesses. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I think trying to address it and having the American people feel like you're trying to address wealth inequality and the outsized influence of corporations in a new way, whether that looks more like a kind of populist right solution or populist left solutions, I think that is like the bare minimum that we probably can both agree
Mm-hmm.
on. It's like someone do something, please.
Yep.
But I think that there is a balance between um, kind of some of the overregulation that we've seen. The whole like abundance movement on the left. Um, there's something to be said for um, you know government kind of rules, restrictions, zoning laws getting in the way of us building more and creating kind of more creating the towns and communities that we want and need. On
Sure.
the other side, I think that there are examples of corporations who have not in certain ways been regulated that they should be, I guess. So it is about finding that balance. I don't totally disagree, but I think someone doing something to advocate for workers and regular Americans and addressing income inequality is like the baseline of kind of again what the populist moment we're in requires.
Sure. I don't disagree there. Kind of want to shift topics a little bit. You noted on it before. You did a trip to Alabama and San Francisco. You got a grant to do this. I just want to know kind of how did you get that grant? And I want you to talk a little bit more in depth about what you learned going from a place like Alabama to San Francisco.
Mhm.
I just went to Alabama on a work trip, and to be honest, I came back and I was in Birmingham, and I
Mhm.
said it wasn't as much of a culture shock as I was expecting.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
kind of want you to touch on that. What was that experience like, and kind of what are the major things you learned?
So I got a grant through the Bold Foundation,
Okay.
which they have a few different chapters on different college campuses, and so I was a part of the Bold network, and they basically gave the students who were part of it a grant to do whatever for a summer. So I got $10,000 to kind of go wild, and I decided to go to San Francisco and Alabama. So again, some of my assumptions were challenged in San Francisco. It was I was there kind of amidst this um, a progressive DA, Chesa Boudin, was getting recalled and people were voting on it. So there were a lot of conversations about crime, which was very interesting, seeing how different people kind of were responding to the true issue of crime in San Francisco.
Hmm.
Um, but also, maybe, recalling him wasn't the right thing. Anyway, so I'm getting in the weeds, but that was very interesting. Alabama. I was in southern Alabama, so like Foley. I was in Fairhope briefly, and I was staying for part of the time at like people's rooms, like Airbnb. You can like rent out a room, so I'd like
Okay.
stay in an extra room and
And did you
kind
go
of.
with friends, or were you doing this
Yeah,
by
I did
yourself?
actually. So I
Okay.
went. I went with two of my friends, and we booked like, again, mostly Airbnbs where it was like a room or two rooms, and we'd meet people, and like we got taken to church
Oh, interesting.
by a couple people. We had like breakfast and dinner with people who like knew each other and like didn't like each other. So there's a lot of this like small town, like, oh, like you talked to George, blah blah blah, which was very fun. Um,
So was it like the Airbnb situation? Was this something you signed up for knowing that if you booked one of these rooms, you were going to be with other people you didn't know and you were doing that for the experience, or were you doing it for like an expense purpose or both?
well, a little bit of both, but honestly, the kind of point in part was to like integrate myself into the community. And so
Gotcha.
the people
That's cool.
who ran the rooms, like I was on a farm for a little bit and got to like, you know, be a part of the farm life and talk with this woman and sit on her porch for like a couple hours and talk with her, and it was very interesting. And I think there are more there's a wider range, it felt like to me, of political beliefs in Alabama than in San Francisco. I saw more of the same in San Francisco, kind of like typical like liberal progressivism. In Alabama, I saw um, again people were more conservative, um, but there was a wider range. So one end is like kind of just regular, moderate, maybe somewhat dissatisfied with our current political climate, but they're uh, open to kind of what I was saying and just like normal people. And then I did have a kind of scary interaction on this pier at night where it's kind of strange. So basically, um, I was in Alabama. So when I was in Alabama, again, there was kind of a wider range of political ideologies, and I was on this pier at night talking to people who were fishing. It was in Fairhope, and I was talking to this man, and he was kind of showing me what he was doing, and he was there with his kids and his wife, and it was like very casual. And then this other woman next to me asked what I was doing there, and I said, I'm from Connecticut. I'm doing this project interviewing people about their politics. And for whatever reason, this kind of like triggered this man who I think thought of me all of a sudden as this like liberal whatever. And he started saying like, oh, so you're here, you support people poisoning the blood of our country, you support them, uh, you know, like whatever with our kid. Like it started to get very dark. And of course, I'm like egging him on, kind of like, well, what do you mean? Like, I wanted to, like, I'm trying to memorize all of this so I could write it down later. And his wife started saying, like, we don't talk about politics. We moved here to not talk about politics, which is very interesting. And he was like holding a knife because he was like, I don't know if he was like shearing these fish or something. I don't really know. So I did eventually remove myself from the situation, and I'm not doing a great job recapping it, but he was someone who I think, while the people from Alabama I met were lovely, he was someone who moved to Alabama thinking he was going to be in some like kind of far right paradise, which actually stood in contrast to the people from that area who were not like that. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting yeah.
Interesting. And so I guess too, I'm curious to know how many cities did you maybe
Mhm.
stop in
Yes.
Alabama versus, you kind of just noted San Francisco. Was it that the only city in California you were in?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
And then how many cities were you in Alabama? And besides, the Airbnb situation where you were tagging along with people to different events, you noted
Mhm.
church. What did you do to, interact with people in the community? Like, would you go into a restaurant and just start
Mhm.
asking people what's going on? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was mainly in I think it was Foley. I think that's like the county that I was in, and I kind of traveled within there. Had a brief 2 days in Mobile as well. But yeah, I went to bars, I went to churches, I went on Facebook and like reached out to people, and so just talked to basically as many random people as possible, and then had some of the people who I stayed at their Airbnbs get me in contact with other people. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting mix. It was interesting going to bars and talking to young people, especially over drinks, because people, to be honest, like do kind of like I'm being more open, they're
Yeah.
being more open, um, and that was very very interesting, and that was yeah, that was interesting.
What was the most common theme you heard amongst young people in Alabama versus San Francisco?
Mm-hmm. I think, and this is like gets to one of my criticisms of the left, which is that I, on principle, don't support any kind of discrimination. I think all people are worthy of, living a good and decent life. Um, but I do think in San Francisco, there was kind of an emphasis on these more like kind of like workplace grievances and like kind of cultural issues, which again, I still think are very important. But there was so much emphasis on those issues. And then in Alabama, you had people who were dealing with like more class kind of issues, and like the content of like what they were talking about and the concerns they had felt a little bit more profound, I guess, than what I was seeing in San Francisco, although I don't mean to diminish anyone's like kind of experience. But I went to a drag brunch in San Francisco, and they were kind of like expressing angst about the state of the world and stuff, and we were at like a $75 drag brunch. I don't know. And it um and so yeah, so that I guess was one thing, and that's something I found is it's like a trend in politics, like the left, which I wouldn't really call it the left, like Democrats, liberals, the past 10 years have been very focused on kind of eliminating discrimination in like the upper echelons of society and in the workplace, which again, I'm not for. Like if you're a woman and you show up, to the workplace and you're getting treated like shit, like I'm not, I don't think that's a good thing. It's just not, to then turn and like suggest that like someone in rural Alabama is like the enemy, when in reality, like their kind of material conditions and like day-to-day life is like not really privileged at all, just has always rubbed me the wrong way, and it was clear when I was there. um People in Alabama are also much more open to using kind of more provocative language, I guess, which was definitely like startling at first. Like I'm from Connecticut, and hearing people say, like, I just remember this one girl being like in a bar being like, "Oh, we just have like black people and white people here, and then we have a lot of Indians." And I was like, "Oh, like, Indian people." And I'm looking around, and it's becoming clear she's talking about Native Americans. And it's so small, but like it is so interesting, like the the difference in how people in Connecticut communicate, um, and in New England. Although someone I met in Alabama said like the only racism they've experienced in Boston was in Boston. So again, it was like this very interesting mix of like people's lived experiences, the issues they were concerned about, the language they were using. Ultimately, people do still have kind of, I mean, the same core needs no matter where you are. Even in San Francisco, people are worried about affordability, for good reason. They're in a very expensive city. And that is a core concern amongst everyone. But yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So affordability, you say, in both Alabama and San Francisco is the main topic you were hearing, which makes sense. I mean, I believe it. That's a problem on the right and the left, right? You
Mhm.
see, Republicans. I mean, essentially this entire last election ran on affordability. Look at Biden's inflation. When I always like to say, inflation, no matter who the president is, just makes him extremely unpopular. If you look back to like Jimmy Carter in the late '70s, it's like a lot of that wasn't his fault, but he, kind of had to take it. It looked like his fault because it's like
Yeah.
when you're the president, you kind of bear a lot of that responsibility economically. But that's super interesting, and I kind of want to touch on something else you said there in terms of affordability. And you kind of mentioned how like people when you were in San Francisco, kind of at that drag show, they were talking about people, maybe a little bit talking down to about people in maybe Alabama. Did you mention something like
Hmm.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to say like that's something that I feel it's like I can only talk to my own experiences as someone from the state of New York. I'm from the Buffalo area. you know, I've had a very good life. I've been able to be fortunate enough to have great education. I went to college. I can only talk to the experiences that I am facing or have seen as a young person in the United States. It's hard for me to relate to, someone living in like Alabama or Iowa or
Hmm.
California, which I think sometimes is hard because I want to do a better job at understanding what those circumstances are. That's why I like what you are doing and what I am doing in a sense, because you and I are both young people in America right
Hmm.
now that have boots on the ground and know what the situation is. I know I talked about this when we spoke on the phone before this call, but a lot of the big podcasters, the new media, right? Joe Rogans and the Lex Friedmans
Hmm.
and Jon Stewart, like they are big time. They are very like wealthy people. They're very well known. And that's great. But a lot of times when they have conversations with these big people or just people in general, it's hard for them to really relate. Where, like, for me, like, for
Hmm.
example, I can talk about one, affordability, or two, just want to talk about the economy for young people. Have friends all the time that are graduating school that are struggling to find a job, like, that have really good grades, really good resume, they
Yeah.
can't find a job. I mean, I went through it. It took me 8 months to get a job out of
Yeah.
school, and played a college sport and had a very high GPA
Hmm.
and a good resume. So I kind of want you to talk about that a little bit. Talk to me about what you are hearing and seeing that's going on with young people in terms of economics
Hmm.
and job market kind of affordability, and what would you say like are your ideas or maybe some solutions that you
Hmm.
support for that?
So a lot of the typical kind of like benchmarks of success and adulthood have been delayed or are like not not accessible. So I think there are more people over like 65 buying homes than people under 35. I don't know if you saw like last week there was a super viral chart about the number of 30-year-olds who are married and
Yeah,
homeowners,
I
and it's
saw that.
just a straight like line down. Um, and so we're kind of in this weird period of arrested development where post college, it's not clear when or if ever you'll be able to buy a home. Most young people are saddled, or I don't want to say most, I think it is most, but most young people are saddled with some kind of like student loan debt. Um, and the job market, it's like I whatever I say is gonna be like aged. It's gonna be a bad take in like 2 weeks or a month because of how fast things are moving with AI. Like I really am very scared and not sure what's about to happen in the next like 18 months. But even before then, I mean, even like when I was applying to jobs, and like stalking people on LinkedIn who ended up getting the jobs, I was like, wow, these people are way overqualified. Like I didn't stand a chance against them, but also why the hell are they
Getting an
going for
entry
this
level
job?
job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's insane. So
Well, that's
I
another
think
problem
that
I have is like I just think back. I've been out of school now for a little over a year, but I had a friend that was in school and he called me and we were talking. He's like, dude, I'm trying to he was trying to find an internship for the summer. He's like, I put in 200 applications. I haven't heard back. Haven't even
yeah.
heard back. And I mean, when I was going through it, it was like I felt like I was just sending applications into like a black hole because it was
Yep.
just wild. And kind of what happened is I just started to figure it out. You kind of have to use networking. You got to find a connection. You got to find your way in the door in an unconventional way because it's
Mhm.
the traditional job application process is terrible. And when you mix in the fact that like AI is moving so rapidly and potentially going to be taking a lot of the entry level
Mhm.
jobs, my concern is like now young people potentially aren't going to have the availability of these entry level
Mhm.
jobs. And then it's like when they become 30, 35, 40, now they don't have the experience of like working job as like a person fresh out of college. So how are they going to be able to function and try to be like a middle manager or like something like that, a more experienced person in the
Mhm.
workplace? So I'm concerned about that. I am a tech optimist with AI in general, but
Mhm.
that is something that I'm seriously concerned for.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it's also creates a lot of like nihilism, depression. You're looking at a generation that it's really pissed off. That and also COVID, like I think people's sense of like what's normal is really skewed now. And so I don't know life is going to look like in like 5 years, 10 years, in the same way that my parents, I think, did have a sense of what life would look like and what their careers might look like. And that anxiety is permeating out into kind of, I think, every aspect of our lives. And if you look, there's like more higher rates of like neuroticism and I think selfishness in young people. I was watching Breaking Points was covering it, I think like yesterday. But yeah, so it's also a social emotional problem too, and that's something that I like to focus on. And as I kind of grow the new populist, want to focus on even more. I did when I was in college. I did research for a year and a half in meaning and purpose, which sounds absurd, but it is actually what motivates a lot of what I'm interested in when I talk about Gen Z politics, because it really is a wellness issue, a loneliness issue, a mental health issue. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think too, you kind of hit the nail on the head there in a lot of factors. I'm still like, again, I'm extremely concerned about like young people in general. That's why, like, that's my biggest thing is I feel like a lot of the people, a lot of the politicians, like a lot of the business leaders, like they're not thinking about like the struggles that maybe like young people face today. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times like you hear, and there is some truth to it, but it's like, oh well, young people, they don't work hard enough. Or I feel like that's like common, especially amongst like maybe you hear your grandparents like, everyone, this generation, your generation's so lazy. And it's like, well, not necessarily. That's not the whole story, right? Like you're not getting the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, is there some sort of case there to be made? Sure. But at the same time, I don't think that they understand some of the struggles that we face due to some of the decisions that their generations have made. I
Yep.
mean, in reality, like the boomers, like they've been controlling politics in the United States for a long time now, and
Mm-hmm.
young people are continuing to do worse over time. They've made decisions that have benefited their generation and their generation only for the past couple of decades.
Yeah.
So, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, and I saw a headline recently that was like the American dream isn't red, white, and blue, it's gray, which I
Yeah.
thought was very clever. But yeah, I mean it's and this is where like we can kind of zoom out and have an interesting conversation about the kind of like post-war consensus liberalism. I think that there are a lot of things I do blame the boomers for, and they're kind of like individualism, gonna take what's mine, not gonna leave the stage, gonna hoard all the resources. Like I have a lot of problems with, but I sometimes get frustrated when I think like people kind of almost reject everything about the world that the boomers created. Like I don't think that um I don't know, the idea behind a kind of free society that prioritizes, free markets and journalism and I don't know, there's like something just went very wrong with the boomers. I don't know if I like this like blanket, like everything that they were doing was wrong, but it's something like 5 years ago, I think I would have had a very different answer. Sorry, this is like not really like a coherent thought, but like I think I would have had a very different answer like 5 years ago about the boomers. And like now I just become more and more frustrated with that generation, although there's some of that kind of liberal idealism and sense of freedom and individual dignity that I do still value. But the way that applied to this kind of their economic uh, uh, world has been super destructive.
Exactly. I totally agree with you there. And so here's an example. Like we agree right here, but I think like we're gonna agree on like why. So like for me, like I look at it and it's like a lot of it revolves around monetary policy. Like I believe in the fact that like the government has been able to just spend and print money, and the fact that we're
Mm-hmm.
now
Yeah.
$37 trillion in debt has been probably the most destructive thing. And for me, like I look at
Mm-hmm.
the economy as a whole, right? Like you talked about the post-war era. It's like when we were really in our heyday. Now, I struggle to say that, but like we had very low levels of inequality, right? In the 50s and 60s, Now we had issues with, civil rights, and there was a
Hmm.
lot of stuff going on. But like in terms of like the nuclear family kind of stuff you said, people being able to have a family on one job
Yep.
working at a factory, that stuff existed then where it doesn't exist today. So I blame a lot of the problems on monetary policy that the government has created and enacted over the last since 1971 when we got off the gold standard. So that's kind of where I sit. Where like I feel like someone like you might be a little bit different, maybe have a different opinion. So kind of talk about that. What does the left look like? What does the left populist look like for kind of the causes of some of the economic strains we see?
So I think I would like to see a world or a politics that resembles, like, for if I'm thinking of like a 2028 candidate, would like to see someone that resembles an FDR. I know that part of why the American middle class and Americans were thriving so much in that era is because we were so dominant following the war, but also having a public option for people, whether a healthcare option, schools, um, even like daycare and like summer camp. Like if parents had a kind of baseline option for an affordable summer camp for their kids, I think that would make more people potentially willing to have children. Um, so I think having a public option and a strong social safety net is something that I do feel strongly about. Although again, I'm not someone who thinks like that, what's the phrase that like Americans don't want to hand out, they want to hand up or something.
Yeah,
Like I do think that there are a lot of structural issues at the top, which again, this is probably where we disagree a little bit, but structural issues at the top, where companies have kind of run wild and taken advantage of consumers and workers. And I don't disagree with you that there's way too much government spending. And that's what's kind of the challenge for a progressive candidate or a populist candidate is if they do believe in a strong social safety net, and kind of supporting the public option, then they have to make the case for government spending, which is really hard because the government hasn't spent well. So it is a really challenging
sure.
thing, but yeah, I mean
But
it's yeah.
my challenge
No, no,
there,
no.
right? I'm not opposed to the government spending. My challenge is we are running wild with the spending, and we have been. I mean, we run $2 trillion deficits. You kind of talked about like I know I've seen a lot of your content, and this would be like maybe a point where we differ. It's like you talk about greedy corporations, and though that might be true, and certainly like you can make the argument
Mhm.
for that, absolutely. I look at it and I'm like, well, who's greedy here? I mean, these businesses can't run deficits, like they can't print money. The government's
Mhm.
spending way more than they bring in. So I like make that argument, and then you kind of talk about businesses as general. It's like, well, the government's been one of the main leaders in
Mhm.
allowing businesses to run wild, especially with like something like campaign financing. These
Yep.
businesses spend like ridiculous amounts of money in super PACs, and that's because the government's enabled them to do so. So like
Mhm.
there's an example where I think like the right and the left like talk about getting money out of politics.
Mhm.
Yeah, the populist right and the populist left definitely probably align there.
Mhm. No, it's an unholy marriage between the government and corporate America, and that's again why someone like Alina Khan was, there's pictures with her and like Steve Bannon. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is probably maybe also something where we disagree, but I do think raising taxes on the super wealthy is one way we could pay for more programs, and one of the things that I think my take on that is that it is also a kind of like I don't want to say like a public health issue, but when we reward greed, that kind of like that philosophy bleeds into everything else that we do. And so when we let the super rich run wild, which also this is like from the research I did in college looking at well-being, your uh kind of like relative well-being increases kind of forever. So you if you make another million and then another million, you're gonna in relation to other people, you're gonna think you're doing better. But your day-to-day emotions after a certain amount of money don't change. So even if you have, and I'm not talking about like I have no problem with people having multi million dollar assets or whatever. Like I have no problem with that. But the super rich, it's not particularly uh, changing their day-to-day emotions, and I think it's rewarding the wrong behaviors in our society. And so I do understand, like, I understand why people push back, but um yeah, I don't think that those people should be allowed to do, kind of whatever,
Sure.
because even though wealth, it's not a zero sum game, power is, and in America, wealth equals power. And so if you have more resources to, um, let's say we do build more homes, which I think is something that there's an increasing consensus on, even though private equity owns 3% of only 3% of homes currently, they buy, I think at this point, like roughly like 24% each year in the past few years. So we got to curb them in order to see through kind of the abundance, like let's build more. So anyway, that was kind of long-winded and all over the place, but I do think we should tax the ultra wealthy more. And they're not going to leave. I mean, their assets are in the US. Like, it's not as though they're going to like ditch and go somewhere else. Their wealth is here.
Sure.
Um,
And I agree. I think because I read a great book. It was called The Spirit Level. I don't know if you've ever read it. And it talks about like economies, countries that have like less economic inequality are better off across the board in every way, from
yeah.
health, mental health, crime, education, social lives, everything, right? So
Hmm.
that to me really changed my life, because a few years ago I would never have been like, economic inequality is something we have to tackle. Whereas like I look at it from maybe a different perspective, and I'm like, okay, well, my concern is less of like, well, how do we make the billionaires like have less wealth, and how do we like lift up everyone else
Hmm.
and get them to be more
Yeah.
wealthy. And again too, like I push back on the government side of it, because it's like, well, we talk about billionaires. First of all, yeah, I don't want to see billionaires influencing politics, but it's like the government's kind of just throwing their hands up, being like, well, there's nothing
Hmm.
we can do, which is just a load of crap. And
Hmm.
also, how many billionaires have government contracts? What? Why? How many
Yeah.
subsidies? How many times is government subsidizing these multi-billion-dollar companies?
Yep.
The 2008 financial
Hmm.
crisis. I
Hmm.
mean, we talk about big business. It's like in
Yep.
2008, the government bailed out big banks, and you know what
Yep.
happened to all the small community banks? They didn't get bailed out. They got acquired and merged with the huge
Hmm.
banks. So I
Yeah.
mean, again, like I just we talk about kind of government. I'm like, well, sometimes, for my opinion, government can do too much, and they're not looking out for the best interest of like a
Hmm.
common person, which leads to a populist movement like the right and the left are experiencing right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I wouldn't disagree with that. And again, that's why a FDR style candidate has an uphill battle in convincing people. But I don't think it's not a worthwhile kind of platform.
For sure. All right, so I want to kind of shift here a little bit. I want to ask you a couple more things about just like personally, politically with you, and then want to talk a little bit about the new populist before we wrap up here again. Just have a couple last questions. I want to know kind of, where did the interest in politics really start? Do you have a background in it, or was there always a love from the beginning, or like how did that start up for you?
So my parents have been interested in politics like forever. So growing up, it was like, on the news, the news was on in the background all the time. So kind of always had an interest in it. I like, my favorite show when I was younger was 60 Minutes, which is very dorky, but um, it was just always something that I found interesting. And I think separate from that, I have this kind of like, I don't know, moral or personal kind of feeling and sense that, again, that most people are good and worth investing in and treating with dignity and respect. And I felt like, especially on the left, our politics uh, too often did not reflect that kind of philosophy. And so it was kind of a combination of, again, how I look at people, and then just like kind of in the background, an awareness of politics. So yeah, so just kind of always interested in it.
Interesting. And kind of, what drew you to populism? Like, take me through, like, define populism, like, in your eyes, and kind of what drew you to the populist stance, maybe.
So when I was trying to come up with the new populist, the name, I have like a Google Doc where I was looking at a bunch of different kind of possible names, and chatting with my friend about what I should name it. And um, the new populist, and populism specifically to me, represents a movement of the people against the elite and against a dysfunctional elite. And I think it is a kind of nonpartisan enough term as well. I think there are people on the left and right who might claim it or at least don't associate it necessarily with the other party exclusively. And I also think that it's used sometimes to kind of demonize, authoritarian type leaders, but unfortunately also demonizes the movements behind them. And even if I don't necessarily, like I don't necessarily like someone like a Trump, but I do think the MAGA movement itself is populist. And I do think it comes out of a genuine kind of frustration from kind of, everyday Americans who are frustrated at the system. And so that's why
Sure.
I think it's almost like a reclaiming of the term for the people. And then the new populist, it's hopefully a kind of new common ground populism, and that is kind of the eventual or the goal of the new populace is to find where those two growing segments of the population overlap.
I love it. And I mean, kind of just to touch on what you said with the MAGA movement a little bit, it's like, to me, they're like, I think the people within the movement, a lot of them, and it's tough because there's many different like um, groups within the MAGA movement. I'm putting in air quotes,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of them are genuine populists. However, it's
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
if we're looking at what's going on or what has gone on, especially in Trump's first term, I wouldn't necessarily define him as populist. I mean, I think he kind of was carrying on the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
However, you talked about FDR. Like, would you define FDR as a populist?
Yeah.
Okay. So like you talk about FDR, it's like, man, in 2016, like Trump's populism really hit where like Hillary was certainly no populist. She was definitely an elitist, and a lot of she essentially, the Democrats like abandoned the working class and started focusing on culture
Yeah.
issues where Trump was like actually saying, whether he meant it or not, it really didn't matter because he was saying the things that people were feeling, right? The people in the Rust
Yep.
Belt that got their jobs shipped overseas, or, whether it be people that live in South Texas down by the border. You know what I mean? Like all these different things. Like he was saying this stuff that was resonating a lot with like working class people. So I think that that's interesting you brought that up. I love the new name, the new populace, and that kind of will shift me into talking a little bit about the agenda. Now, when I saw the new populace for the first time, I was looking into it, very interested, and it kind of reminded me of, do you know who Andrew Yang is?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminded me of what he's doing a little bit with his Forward Party. However, I feel like they're having a tough time gaining traction. I feel like Andrew Yang is trying to build a coalition of like moderates, kind of independent political people that are sick of the two-party system. However, I feel like a big problem he faces is his Forward Party doesn't stand for anything. Like if any issue comes up, he kind of is like tiptoeing one way or the other. So that's kind of an issue. You have to stand for something. And I noticed on the New Populist on your social media, you talked about the agenda. And that is doing things like supporting labor, getting money out of politics, people first policies, uniting working America. Why are these your main agenda points? And what made you want to lay these out for people to see?
So I think the goal of the new populace is twofold. One, it is to promote economic populism and those kind of policies, but also to unite people through the promotion of those policies. And so, again, when you look at like a blind test of, healthcare policy, most people end up choosing the same option. Young people have the same kind of three concerns, the same three top concerns: healthcare, housing. I think the other one is just like general economy. That was the Harvard Youth poll.
Yep, young people don't care about what's going on in Iran.
Yeah, so basically it is trying to emphasize those core economic needs, and in part in doing so hopefully bring people together. So I have maybe some ideas about solutions, but really the goal, and this is like something that's I've kind of been pausing the last month, the goal is to bring people in for interviews and kind of little blurbs here and there. Bring people in who have ideas about what this could look like. And so talking with, Felicia Wong, who was the outgoing head of the Roosevelt Institute, or talking with Harriet Fraud from Democracy at Work, or Patrick Brown from, the Ethics and Public Policy Center, talking to a union leader. The goal is to bring in more people and highlight more people who either kind of at the national political level or in their towns or cities have solutions that align with the kind of overarching goals of the new populist.
All right, I love that. And so from there, I want to ask you, how have like traditional Democrats and Republicans that maybe aren't populists in your eyes, where have they gone wrong? Like, what are they doing? And
Mm.
what are they doing wrong that's really going against your main points, your main agenda there with supporting labor, people first policies, uniting working America? Where are they going wrong?
I mean, I think we probably both agree, money is a big part of it. So if the public is paying their salary, which is I think like 150, 140 a
It's
year
something
for a
like that.
congressperson, that's nothing compared to the amount of money they're getting in, campaign donations and other, whatever from corporate donors. So it's hard to compete with corporate America. They're also, politics has become a business, and there are, it's a multi-million dollar industry to get people elected, and there are, focus groups and consultants and whatever. And it's just become, I think, very easy to ignore people, ignore your constituents, and be out of touch. Like I think it's easier to do that. And so, um, in an ideal world, we'd create conditions that would make it harder to be out of touch and not responsive to your constituents. So I think that's a big part of it. And I also think like there are plenty of people who thought like it was like we'd like solved the world. Like I think like that's like the post-war liberal consensus. Like everything is good and perfect, and that's why I think there's like pushback. Like when people are protesting about Gaza, for example, I think there are some people like some boomers who are like, but we like fix the world. Like why are you guys upset? Why are people, rebelling? Like we got everything sorted out. These are the lines, these are the rules. Um and those, rules didn't work for a lot of people or didn't end up working for a lot of people. And so I think um in some ways, like it's not that I don't blame them, I do, but in some ways it's just change is going to come from young people who literally are experiencing these things. Like it's not even just about convincing, so and so. I don't think I'm going to convince Chuck Schumer of anything. I think
Right.
he needs to be primaried.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah.
agree. Well, and I love that. First off, I love that with in terms of young people. We are the future, not Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer
Mhm.
doesn't he has no idea what's going on. That he's my senator. He has no
Mhm.
idea what I'm
Yeah.
feeling, what's going on with me. So when you talked about being out of touch, I think that rings incredibly true. And I think a couple of things. One is age, right, of politicians, just being out of touch with young people, what we're seeing, feeling, going through. And two, and this kind of goes back to maybe my pursue or think that limited government is maybe better. I think that government in Washington D.C., like these D.C. politicians, are out of touch with what's going on
Mhm.
in the outskirts of Alabama or some of these or Alaska. Like right, like it's crazy for me to think that someone in D.C. knows what's best for someone in Alaska that's never even
Mhm.
lived there. Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think that is incredibly powerful. Right. Politicians are definitely out of touch.
Mhm. Yeah. That's
It's a
it's tough out
story.
there.
Yeah. And I guess I got a couple more here before I let you go. We'll wrap it up. I want to know, since you've started the new Populist, what have you learned?
Mm. Um, there are more people who feel the same way than you realize, which I know is what prompted me in part to start it, but it's been really cool getting messages from people who are from all over and from different political backgrounds saying, "Hey, like I like what you're doing, and this is something that resonates." And I think also uh, this is especially true of the left, that like we're gonna convince people by leading like information first and by talking down to people and lecturing people, and like reality, like politics are won through, changing people's hearts and minds, and striking an emotional chord as well. And so part of what I'm doing is like trying to create messages and narratives that resonate with people to distill kind of maybe more complex political kind of a political platform or a political ideology into these like these bite-sized things. So that's also part of it too. And I think like both, you know, both parties, I mean the right definitely does a better job of this, but um, in the social media age, like, you know, as long as you are telling the truth and relying on facts, there's nothing wrong with trying to like make your case with kind of an emotional argument and try to reach people where they are. And yeah, so
For sure. And you kind of talked about what you've learned right there. I want to know here before we wrap it up, and you kind of already talked about it, but I just want to see, I want it laid out in a big picture. What's your vision for the new populist? What if everything worked out perfectly, what do you want it to look like?
so I went into this well, I went into this not really knowing what I was doing, but doing a kind of social media hub. Um, and I think I want to continue to grow the social media platform and, um, bring more people in, do more interviews, maybe get some people as kind of like correspondents to be featured on the new Populist. I mean, I there's a small part of me that like would love to create like an alternative version to of like Charlie Kirk's Turning Point. I don't know exactly how that would come about, but that is something that intrigues me. I mean, I don't have like billions of dollars behind me like Charlie Kirk,
Well,
but
but hang on, I want to ask, like, you don't mean like in terms of like Charlie Kirk being like a conservative or a right wing kind of talking head. You mean kind of what he's doing with Turning Point USA and kind of spreading it across campuses.
yeah, like having both the kind of social media hub and also chapters.
Okay, awesome. I love that. That's a great idea. It's
We'll
funny,
see.
like I went to a SUNY school in New York State and like we had someone from Turning Point come and I was like, you guys come here? Like it was kind of actually like a crazy experience seeing someone. So it's definitely doable. And it just starts with one place. It starts with the connecting people. Social media is a great place because the reach
Hmm.
is just, you know, unmatched. You can get to so many people. And you already have a really solid foundation, especially on TikTok. I think are you close to maybe 20,000 followers?
Almost 19 right now, so.
Yeah, so you're doing great and everything's looking awesome. Lily, I love what you're doing. Even if we might not agree on everything, I think it's important to have these conversations. And like
Hmm.
I said, you and I, like we're the young people. We're telling you what
Hmm.
we're seeing and what people that we talk to are experiencing. So I am so happy that you came on. We're able to kind of share your story here. And I hope we can do something again soon.
Me too. This is awesome.
Thank you. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Me too. Okay, thank you.